Today on the Ghastly Journal, we uncover a case so disturbing that it forced the FBI to intervene. A tale of ritualistic abuse, hidden children, and a chilling manifesto that claimed some children were born to be vessels for sin. That isn't just a story about a broken system. It's a story about the evil that wears a human face.
The whispers no one wanted to believe. The cries no one dared to hear.
In the quaint town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, lived Howard and Margaret Folling. Charming, respected, generous. Over 15 years, they adopted 12 children. But there were no birth certificates, no questions asked. To the outside world, they were saints. But behind the walls of their grand Victorian home, something horrifying festered, something that would haunt the town forever. The Ghastly Journal, the sinister tale of the Follings. Welcome back to Dark Britain Files, where we peel back the veneer of normalcy to expose the darkness lurking beneath. Today's story will make you question the very meaning of family, a case so chilling it drew the attention of federal investigators. That is the twisted history of the Follings, a couple who adopted 12 children over 15 years, none of whom had birth certificates. What began as a heartwarming tale of generosity unraveled into something far more sinister. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly descent into the darkest corners of human history. Now, let's begin. A picture-perfect facade. The small town of Millbrook, nestled in the rolling hills of western Pennsylvania, was the last place anyone would expect to harbour such horror. With a population of just under 3,000, it was the kind of town where everyone knew each other, where potlucks and high school football games were the highlights of the social calendar, and neighbours still brought casseroles when someone fell ill. Their residence was a sprawling Victorian mansion on Elm Street, partially hidden by ancient oak trees. The house had stood vacant for nearly a decade before the Follings purchased it, earning it the local nickname, the Haunted House on the Hill. But Howard, a successful investment banker from Pittsburgh, saw potential. He and Margaret, a former paediatric nurse, poured a fortune into renovations, transforming the crumbling structure into the envy of the neighbourhood. They seemed like such a lovely couple, recalls Elaine Winters, a neighbour who lived across the street for nearly 20 years. Howard was always impeccably dressed, even when checking the mail. And Margaret, she had this elegance about her, so poised, so refined, the kind of people who made you feel important just by talking to you. But beneath that polished exterior lay secrets that would eventually shatter the town's idyllic illusion. The first red flags. Public records showed that Howard and Margaret were unable to have biological children, a source of deep sorrow for Margaret, who had always dreamed of a large family. She used to watch the neighbourhood kids from her porch, Winters remembers. There was something heartbreaking about it, the way she'd sit there for hours just watching them play. Then, in the summer of 1980, the Follings announced they had adopted a baby boy named James. The town rejoiced. Neighbours threw a surprise baby shower, and the local church held a blessing ceremony. But something was off. Margaret wouldn't let anyone else hold him, recalls Clara Jenkins, a fellow churchgoer. Not even the pastor. When he asked to hold James for the blessing, her face twisted like a cornered animal. Howard had to whisper something before she finally handed him over, and even then, she stood so close she was practically breathing down the pastor's neck. At the time, people dismissed it as the protectiveness of a new mother, but in hindsight, it was the first warning sign. A rapidly growing family, within 2 years, the Follings adopted a second child, a girl named Elizabeth. Then came Thomas, Catherine, and William. By 1985, they had 5 children under 6 years old. The speed of the adoptions was unusual. Pennsylvania's adoption process was notoriously slow, yet the Follings bypassed it with alarming ease. Howard was wealthy, well-connected, says Detective Richard Cooper, who later led the investigation. Who would question a wealthy couple taking in children who might otherwise grow up in the system? But the cracks in their perfect image were starting to show. None of the Folling children attended public school. Margaret insisted on homeschooling them. They were rarely seen in town, and when they were, they clung to their parents like shadows. They didn't have friends, says former resident Patricia Hayes. I tried arranging a playdate for my son with James once. Margaret always had an excuse. He was sick, too much schoolwork, a family trip. After a while, I stopped asking. The accident that exposed the truth. The family's isolation might have continued indefinitely if not for an accident in the summer of 1987. 9-year-old Thomas fell from a tree in the backyard, breaking his arm. Despite her nursing background, Margaret refused to take him to the hospital. Instead, she tried to set bone herself. The result was a compound fracture that became infected. By the time Howard finally overruled her and rushed Thomas to emergency room, the boy was in septic shock. Dr. Sarah Chen, the attending physician, was immediately suspicious. He didn't cry, not once, she recalls. When I asked how he broke his arm, he looked at his father before answering, like he needed permission to speak. When she requested Thomas's medical records, Howard claimed they had been lost in a fire at adoption agency. Then he threatened to transfer Thomas to another hospital when she pressed further. Dr. Chen filed a report with Child Protective Services. A failed investigation. A caseworker named David Morris was assigned to investigate. He visited the Folling home, interviewed the parents, and observed the children. His conclusion? No evidence of abuse or neglect. The case was closed. The hidden children. Over the next few years, the Follings adopted 3 more children, Robert, Anne, and Henry, bringing their total to 8. But whispers in town grew louder. They never fidgeted in church, Jenkins recalls. Just sat in a perfect row, staring straight ahead. It was unnatural. Then, in 1992, a new family moved to Millbrook. Michael and Susan Fletcher, along with their teenage daughter, Emily. Susan, a social worker, noticed something disturbing about the Folling children immediately. They flinched at sudden movements, Emily remembers, never made eye contact, always watched Margaret out of the corners of their eyes like they were afraid of missing some unspoken command. Susan began documenting her observations. She befriended Margaret, hoping to learn more. During one visit, she noticed a locked room on the 3rd floor. I heard shuffling, sometimes crying, Susan later told Detective Cooper. When she asked about it, Margaret dismissed it as just storage. Then Susan saw a face in the 3rd floor window, a girl she didn't recognise. Susan's suspicions deepened when her husband, Michael, a journalist, uncovered a pattern of adoption fraud in Pennsylvania, agencies illegally placing children without documentation. The timeline matched the Follings' adoptions. Shortly after Michael's articles were published, the Follings announced another adoption, twins, Peter and Paul, followed by a girl named Mary. 12 children in total. Susan Fletcher, now terminally ill with cancer, handed Detective Cooper a file before her death, pages of notes, photographs, inconsistencies. Cooper, defying orders from his superiors, pursued the case. He tracked down a former housekeeper, Maria Vasquez, who finally broke her silence. These children were broken, she said. Forced to follow impossible rules, addressed Howard and Margaret as Sir and Madam, and the 3rd floor. I left food outside locked rooms 3 times a day. I never saw who was inside, but I heard them. Children's voices, crying. On October 23, 1995, authorities raided the Folling home. The 12 official children were found in their rooms, eerily still. But the absolute horror was on the 3rd floor. 3 emaciated children locked in bare rooms, living in filth. Medical exams revealed severe malnutrition and abuse. None had birth certificates. None existed in any official record. Still started how for Margaret's twisted beliefs. How Margaret's twisted beliefs. Investigators uncovered Margaret's journal, a manifesto detailing her delusional mission to purify children. She believed they were born with sin, and her rituals transferred that sin to other children, the vessels. Once a vessel was full, they were discarded. Excavations on the property uncovered 5 bodies. Howard, in a plea deal, led authorities to 3 more burial sites, 8 additional victims, 13 in total. The aftermath. Margaret was deemed mentally unfit for trial and died in a psychiatric facility in 2008. Howard served 16 years before he died in prison. The surviving Folling children struggled to recover. James committed suicide. Elizabeth battled anorexia. Thomas vanished. The house was demolished, replaced by a memorial garden. The lesson. The Follings preyed on society's blind spots: wealth, respectability, and the systemic neglect of marginalised children. We failed them, Cooper says. The neighbours who stayed silent. The officials were too intimidated to ask questions. The system that looked the other way. This case changed adoption laws. It exposed how darkness can hide in plain sight. And it reminds us, evil doesn't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes it lives in the house on the hill. This has been the Ghastly Journal. If you or someone you know has information about missing children, contact the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST. Until next time, stay vigilant. The most monstrous truths are often the ones we refuse to see.